Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, so we are here today with Xay Khamsyvoravong, who is the incoming mayor of Newport. And first of all, congratulations on that. That's the formality of you weren't elected as mayor. You were elected to the city council, and then within the city council, the mayor is selected by the councilors and councilors-elect. You were the top vote getter in the at-large, so you, for a number of reasons, including that, were kind of an obvious choice. But so congratulations on that. What's it like to be the mayor-elect of Newport?
It's tremendously exciting. Thank you very much, Bill. And I think an obvious choice is never something I felt with a name like mine. And so this has been a surreal experience, but I'm incredibly flattered and honored to have the support of not only all the folks who voted for me, but also my fellow incoming councilors.
When you decided to run for council, and we'll get into your deeper background for sure and priorities, and there's a lot we can touch on here today, but what was it that initially made you say, you know what, I'm running for council this year?
My wife and I love Newport, and what we felt living there and watching the trends that were happening is that change was happening very quickly in Newport. A lot of the same trends that I see in my work around other parts of the country were happening in Newport, but at a pace that was much, much faster than I've been seeing in other places. And we were really worried because what we were seeing is that was starting to cause residents to move out of town. And Newport, one of the reasons we love Newport so much is because it is so culturally dynamic. And we were really afraid that we were going to start to lose that community fabric that made it such a wonderful place to live.
There's so many reasons for this, and I can speak to it, first of all, from a firsthand experience of living in Newport, and then just watching not only the real estate shift, which is very real but not exclusive to Newport, but is dramatic in Newport, but the impact of that real estate shift in terms of people in our general age range, people who are even sometimes multi-generational Newport residents just not being able to afford to live in town. And in some cases, it's not an affordability question. It's just there's nowhere to go. There's just an inventory that is so low, so narrow in scope that it's just been a really challenging period to establish residency or even maintain residency in Newport. What do you think that's about?
I think you've hit it right on, right? We came of age sort of in that post-financial crisis period, right, where the big focus from a housing perspective was on capital A affordable housing. And while there's certainly work to be done there, what we've seen now is this undercurrent that is tied largely to housing that's driving anxiety amongst a lot of people in many different income categories, many different ages and backgrounds. And so that anxiety is having a heavy psychological impact on our community. And really understanding what the root causes of that were a big part of what I spent my campaign doing. You know, I approached this campaign the same way that I've approached solving a lot of the other challenges that I've taken on in my life, which is to start by listening. And so I went door to door in every single neighborhood in Newport. And what I found is this common theme that issues surrounding housing are primary concerns for people. It is leading and driving the major decisions that they're making about their own lives. And so it's something that we really need to take seriously and focus on. Really, that workforce and middle class housing is where we're feeling a big gap right now in the housing market. And so that's where a lot of my focus is going to be right out of the gate. I think there are a lot of different factors driving that at this point. To your point, inventory is a major issue. What we can do to not only improve inventory, but also preserve the existing housing stock that we have, really critically important to ensuring that residents start to feel some level of relief around the housing options that they have.
It's a number of things. It's the fact, look, it's an island. You know, that's one thing. There is room for expansion in the North End development, which is kind of its own probably podcast and conversation and story in and of itself. But look, there's zoning factors to this. There's short-term rental factors, and that's not exclusively Airbnb. You know, that in other words, it's not just to say, all right, we're going to abolish Airbnb and it's going to be resolved. It's it's a broader problem or just factor than that, because there's also short-term rentals that have always been there in Newport. Well, not always, for a long time, in just traditional bed and breakfasts and hotels that, it's not like you're going to convert those into a lowercase a affordable houses. So there's a lot on the table. Do you feel that there's an area, a specific angle that you're going to tackle right out of the gate, or want to tackle, I should say, because you're not the king of Newport. We should be clear about that. That, there are governmental structures where there's a city manager, you have to work with the council, and there's a lot of old and some new money in Newport that also is very influential. So where do you want to go day one in terms of looking at housing?
Yeah, day one, the focus, right, is going to be on executing on the plan that I laid out when I was running for office, which is a 3-part strategy. The first 2 parts of that strategy are really designed at stabilizing the situation we have right now, and that's reducing the conversion of residential housing stock into investment properties and short-term rentals. Yep. Newport has traditionally been a wonderful market for seasonal residents that we have. They're an important part of our economy. That's not the part that we're zeroed in on. What we're really zeroed in on are the properties that are being purchased purely for investment purposes. And there are really 2 ways that I saw of getting at that. The first is getting the current short-term rental situation under control. The City Council, when that ultimately did react, I think, enacted some good policies that should be helpful to that end, but we don't have the requisite zoning enforcement mechanisms that we need to actually start to police the bad actors and reduce the incentive that exists out there for short-term rentals being run by investors. The second approach to it that's really important, that we already have some good headway on right now, thanks to the Council's recent actions at their last 2 meetings, is setting a lower tax rate for residents. So that's taking our existing residential tax rate structure, splitting it into 2 parts, and differentiating between those properties that are homes for people who live in Newport for the majority of the year versus those that are primarily being used as investment properties. Yeah. The third part of the strategy, and this is a bit broader, is going to be really getting at those issues that you outlined earlier. The existing zoning rules that we have on the books, the way that we talk about and consider density within a city like Newport that has a limited amount of land, to really make sure that we are incentivizing the construction of housing that's going to help address the middle class and workforce shortages that we have right now.
Yeah, and that's a very real. It's not just I've heard some people have said to me specifically, well, I'll say, well, I want to move back to Newport, and there's not much inventory, it's not very affordable at all, and they'll say, well, too bad, go live somewhere else. I've literally heard that statement from some people. Okay, so take me out of it. Look at all the small businesses, even the mid-sized business, even some of the larger companies in Newport that depend on a workforce that simply can't afford to be there. And by the way, not just businesses, city services, education. If you're a teacher right now, it would be almost impossible to imagine that you could find a place, especially if you're a new teacher, that's on Aquidneck Island. Now you're commuting from who knows where, and you lose that interaction at the grocery store or with a parent that you might bump into on Broadway or whatever it is. So it's a broader problem than just the feel-good, hey, I want to live in a cool city aspect of things. It's actually going to impact the economic reality over the next 5 to 10 years if it's not dialed in.
Yeah, when you spend a lot of time listening to people, you start to hear some commonalities that are emerging in those conversations. And occasionally it's just a matter of connecting the dots to get people to understand how some intelligent policy here could be really helpful. Yeah. And so when we talk about housing insecurity, I like to think about it through people that are directly impacted and indirectly impacted. It's those that are indirectly impacted that I think really benefit from being involved in the conversation around housing. People that are directly impacted, these are people who are feeling very housing insecure themselves, right? So this is the senior on a fixed income who, while they may have an asset in a home that is worth quite a bit, from a cash flow perspective, are really struggling because that increase in property valuations is also driving up their property taxes much faster than they'd ever planned for. And so they need some level of relief if they're going to continue to live in the community. And the second group there, right, a little bit more of an acute type of pain, are renters, people who are holding their breath at the end of every single lease renewal. And they're bracing themselves for the best case scenario being an offer to extend at usually a double-digit increase.
Yeah.
This wreaks havoc on anybody who is adhering to a budget. So most of us in our age cohort that are pretty careful with our money and are trying to be responsible, but also make sure that we are able to have a home and a community that we really love and enjoy.
Yeah.
The second half of this, the indirect impact, I think is equally important, because you start to understand how it starts to destabilize a community like Newport that relies so much on its residents for the cultural depth and texture that make it such a dynamic place to visit. Look, the reason my wife and I love Newport so much is because of that cultural texture. The terminology I kept hearing on the campaign trail was, this place is real, right? And,
Yeah.
and what they mean by that is
Yeah.
the reason that people are coming to Newport is for that salty New England town feel that you really can't create synthetically. That really is the result of people who lived in a community for a long time, who are engaged in that community and really contributing to it on a regular basis. So you start to talk about who these people are and how important they are to the quality of life that we all enjoy. School teachers, right? Police and firefighters who are critical to actually, enforcing the laws that keep our neighborhoods livable. The executive directors and the staff of the phenomenal nonprofits that make Newport such a culturally rich community. And you realize that these are the people whose direct housing insecurity is causing an indirect level of housing issues for the rest of our residents. Similarly, the story we always hear about in different communities, but particularly now more and more in Newport, are people who have lived there for generations. And for the first time ever, they're saying, we're going to move away. And it's not because we can't afford our immediate house right here, but it's because our kids can't afford to buy a home here.
Yeah.
And so they're being forced to choose between continuing to participate in those community organizations and with the friends that they've known and cared about for a long time versus spending time with their family. And so I think we find ourselves dealing with a housing crisis that really has touched every corner of the city itself.
So well said. And do you think that the council previously in recent years has done a sufficient job of addressing this, and it's just such a complex problem that nothing can be done in the short term, or do you feel like there were gaps there that you're going to try to close?
I think it's more of just preparing ourselves a bit more for the future and the pace of
Yeah.
change. Being a city councilor is an incredibly challenging job, and so I'm not going to criticize any of the work
Yeah.
that's been done before. In fact, a lot of the things I hope to achieve will be as a result of a lot of the good work that's been done in the past. And Newport, historically, as a community, is a community that has dealt with change in fits and spurts throughout its entire existence, right? You think about the Navy withdrawing from Newport. You think about the loss of the America's Cup. This is a community that has proven very capable of coming together to weather change. The difference is that typically, aside from those event-driven changes, Newport's change has been gradual and it's happened over time. And so we had this rapid acceleration of change that came coinciding with COVID, that we're now seeing through things like the housing crisis we're talking about, through things like climate change, which is becoming an increasingly existential threat to an island community. And you realize that what we need is a council that is equipped and prepared to work together with a higher level of urgency to address these issues. You get a disruptive technology like Airbnb, and Airbnb should be a really wonderful thing for a community like Newport. We have a great tradition of hosting people in our community. You realize how much more popular you are as a friend when all of a sudden you have a guest room at home in Newport.
Especially during the Folk and Jazz Festival or something like that, yeah.
Exactly. And that's wonderful. And you walk around Newport and you see the pineapples everywhere, and it's because hosting is a really important part of our tradition. And so a tool like Airbnb should be a really positive tool for community members that want to rent out a bedroom or want to help extend their role as an unofficial ambassador for the city.
Yeah.
But when you don't react quickly enough to a disruptive technology like Airbnb, what you end up doing is having to make policy decisions that tend to, with a broad stroke, impact policy across the board in a way that might not be as effective and impactful as it could be.
Yeah.
So part of why I thought that it would be beneficial to run and hopefully have the opportunity to serve on the council is to bring that higher level of urgency to the decision making we need to make.
Amazing. And I think that word is so critical as an observer, is this just the urgency of it. It's not there was a time where you might have been able to say, hey, a disruptive technology comes and goes. Is it really going to have the lasting effect? Are people going to say, you know what, I'm tired of having to have someone new in my unit every weekend and clean up and whatever. And naturally it would sort of fizzle out. And that's just not been the case. And it's not just a Newport issue. I mean, we see this problem or the problem associated with it on statewide basis, regionally, internationally. It's not unique. But other municipalities have done a better job of figuring out how to integrate that new technology into the existing infrastructure and needs of the community. So I think it's a really positive way of framing it. There's so many things that are associated with Newport that are happening right now, that are interesting right now. School regionalization is something that was just struck down in in a referendum question. There's new construction happening at Rogers. Obviously, the structure of government, mayor, council, you're not the immediate, you don't have immediate oversight of the school. But, just your take right now sort of on where education is going. Because we were at a point where just a few years ago, Rogers, and it still, by the way, is in this kind of condition, but Rogers reportedly had rats in the building, and Newport was not framed educationally in a way that was very attractive. How does that change?
You can tell a lot about how a community values itself by how it talks about its children and how it invests in education, because that is the absolute critical linkage to what makes a community livable and what makes a community's economy in the long term actually have the key resources it needs to succeed. And so when you start looking at education in Newport, it's helpful to look at it through the lens of the school facilities, which I think dominate a lot of our conversation because these are getting primarily funded through bond referendums that voters have the opportunity to opine on. Then you have the actual day-to-day operation of the schools and how they're doing, which is largely the responsibility of a school board. When we look at the issue of regionalization itself, I think that we have now seen multiple iterations of our elected officials and public leaders expending an extraordinary amount of their bandwidth on getting regionalization enacted. Throughout that entire duration, they have not yet broken through with the level of success that's required to actually make it a reality.
Yeah.
So the assessment that I'm making right now is the continued pursuit of regionalization by elected officials the highest and best use of our bandwidth when it comes to the focus and attention that our schools need. Academic performance and expectations need to be higher in the city of Newport. Our students are not getting the education they deserve. I think having good school facilities is a good first step, but that is just the first step. And what we really need to be looking at doing is how we improve those educational outcomes. In the future, if we do decide to revisit regionalization, I think the one thing we've learned looking back at the past 10 years of efforts is that it needs to be a community-led and driven initiative. This can't be a top-down approach led by elected officials, but it really needs to be led by those community leaders who are committed to working on the issue of education at a grassroots level day to day.
Yeah. Again, I completely agree. It never felt it had the passion on the ground, like you said. There were advocates, and I would bump into advocates from time to time that would say, hey, can I have your ear for 2 minutes on regionalization? And I would say, okay, I really would prefer to get a burrito at Leo's and get to band practice, but okay, yeah, we can talk about this. And honestly, most of the time it was an incomplete thought. It was just, yeah, we should do this because we've been told it's an opportunity for our education infrastructure to grow. When the reality is the compelling arguments for here's what, from my perspective, from my family, here's what I think regionalization where it would benefit us. That was never really brought up. It was just sort of like, I've heard this is a good thing, and so what do you think? And you're right. Those grassroots movements, or at least that may not be the right way to frame it, but a community-driven movement probably is a much more effective way to get something done at this point, especially when it's been proven. So, yeah.
And let's be honest, right? The political decision makers who are in office tend to be adults.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is a conversation around things like regionalization that focus on the kinds of things that are really important to adults. And that usually, just because it's an objective measure, tends to be financial. I'm a banker. I understand how important it is to have those financial benefits clarified and to understand them. But when we're talking about something like education, something that we cannot afford to not fix, that we have to get right for our future, the real focus should be on educational outcomes, and that means talking about kids. Early in my career, I was one of the early board members of an organization, nonprofit called Young Voices. Young Voices specifically works with kids in our public schools to educate them on how to better understand and advocate on issues of public policy that impact education. And so it's fascinating when you talk to kids at that level. What they're focused on really are how they make sure they get the educational opportunities that they feel they need in order to be able to be successful, in order to feel that they're motivated to reach their full potential. And that's really where I think educational conversations in the future need to be focused.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Economic development in Newport is a fascinating conversation. It's such an important, there's the small business level, even you could argue micro entities to a certain extent, that which would include freelancers and sailing and the arts and all of this. And then there's the titans, the mansions, or I should say the Preservation Society and similar organizations. There's Folk and Jazz Festival. There's the sailing industry. What's missing in terms of economic development? Because it's actually pretty healthy right now. But what can be done to, number one, expand it, and number two, sort of have it felt more by the community as a whole?
I think right now we have a very culture and tourism-based economy. Yeah. And we are incredibly lucky to have that. I cannot tell you how proud I am to be part of a community that usually is the face of Rhode Island, to the extent that people think about Rhode Island and what its economy looks like. But the reality is that if we want higher paying jobs in the future, we need to start thinking about the role that we have in thought-based industry. Yeah. We talk a lot about the blue economy and the potential role that Newport could play there. Part of why I think that there's so much potential for us to start developing in that field is that we sort of have the critical elements that are necessary to push into a new economic development territory. We've done the tourism and culture thing quite well, and the people in the state at the local level and also the community leaders who have been a huge part of that deserve a lot of credit, because that is not a gift that most places are lucky to start with.
That's right.
What we need to look at now is how we actually maximize the value of the people moving through our state and our local community on a regular basis to really start to build out industries for the future.
Yeah, innovation, the innovation industry. And look, there's the Innovate Newport Center. There are hubs, so to speak, but when we think about the blue economy, it's so vast. I mean, obviously offshore wind is a major factor, fisheries, but Newport is right at the heart of the, I guess it's not really shipping, but which is oftentimes discussed in the blue economy context, but boating, that's a part of it. And, there's been pushback from some people, oh, that's just catering to the elite through certain tax breaks and so on and so forth, except for the trickle down is a lot of jobs, a lot of skilled jobs, a lot of jobs that are quality jobs in terms of people being happy in those jobs, and money coming into the community. Look, when you think about, just from my perspective as a musician, cruise ship season extends the summer season numbers, not really to the maximum extent, but you can do an event in October during cruise ship season, and there are fresh people coming into the city. That is in and of itself an element of the overlap of the blue economy and tourism as well. So it's kind of like they can build on each other to a certain extent.
Yeah, it certainly helps. And look, it's more than just the cruise ships, right?
Definitely.
The visitors that we have coming in the off season now have extended the vibrancy of Newport to becoming more and more of a year-round destination, which is tremendously exciting for all of us.
Yeah.
And I want to be super clear here. The one thing that I've heard consistently from people with regards to tourists is, we love you, keep coming.
Yeah.
Our
right.
community is incredibly warm and welcoming and enthusiastic about the visitors that we do have here. A lot of the focus that we have now on our neighborhoods is more just because they need a little bit more of attention and focus in order to remain livable. But with the blue economy, you start to look at the elements that we have in Newport. Yes, you touched on the sailing heritage, which is incredibly valuable because of the overall cachet that it brings to Newport and why people like to come here. But we also have the Navy, right? We also have two academic institutions of higher learning located specifically in Newport. We have a workforce that has a substantial amount of background in some of the technologies that are needed, both traditional and emerging. Institutions like IRIS that are continuing to look at how we push the envelope with continuing to build out the training and tooling of our workforce. And then you also have massive amounts of potential capital, of investors who move through Newport on a regular basis, whether it's for conferences or whether it's because this is where they might have a second home or maybe vacationing. The opportunity to capture the attention and the imagination of those potential investors that come through Newport is enormous. And so when I talk about how we take the existing culture and tourism-based economy that we have right now and how we capitalize on that to convert into a higher paying innovation-based economy, that is why I think that Newport is one of the most promising investment locations for such a hub in Rhode Island.
Very, very well said. And yeah, of course, the naval aspect of it is so critical. And something that I just completely overlooked, because when we hear the blue economy pitches, whether it's from, the URI Bay Campus bond that just passed, or, a lot of the work that I've done on the blue economy, the naval aspect is mentioned, but it's never front and center, and it should be. And let's be honest about it. That's a huge aspect. Same with Iris, who, there's some interesting projects happening there right now. I know that they're about to move this gigantic ship that they've had down there. I don't know what it is beyond just, I know it's this huge ship. They're about to lift it into the bay and tug it down to Mystic, and that project has been ongoing. Just getting it into the water has been a couple of months of day in, day out work, and it's like, we're uniquely positioned for, maybe we're not the Mystic Seaport. We get, maybe we're not that, but we can do a lot of things that are niche-oriented aspects of the blue economy that, when you look up and down the East Coast, yeah, sure, they might be able to build offshore wind off New York or Jersey or whatever the case is. Do they have the mines and facilities to do that type of niche work right inside of a port with deep water, sufficiently deep water, so on and so forth? Probably not, and Newport can tap into that.
Yeah, Newport is certainly well-positioned for a number of economies, but I think we need to be looking beyond things like those that we've immediately identified, like
Yep.
wind, and be thinking about what's next.
Yeah.
Iris is fascinating for this reason, right? You have what has traditionally been a boat restoration and building school, right, a wood boat school,
Yep.
that has now converted itself into a 21st century educational facility, looking at emerging technologies, looking at composites, looking at marine systems. There's a whole separate building right there just adjacent to where that the restoration of Concordia is occurring, and it's fascinating and inspiring to get in there and see what they're doing to help push the emerging market on the marine industry. Second, you also have organizations like 11th Hour,
Yeah.
that are doing tremendous work around the health of our oceans and are leading the way, doing a lot of the research, finding where the intersection is between sailing and making sure we really understand our oceans and what we can do to play our part in sort of the future of the economy that revolves around caring for the health of our oceans and also capitalizing on that throughout the process. And so we're lucky to have some of these organizations, and what we want to keep doing is attracting as many of them as possible, as this being one of the thought leaders, one of the thought locations within the U.S. On this industry.
Yeah, big time stuff happening there, no question about it. I'm glad you knew the name of the vessel as well. It's it's not quite my wheelhouse, but I'm interested in it. And when people approach me with that stuff, I want to be able to digest it more and more and more and get it so it's second nature as far as what vessel is this, what's the project that's taking place. And I think there's an enthusiasm probably for the layperson as well to know more about what's happening in composites and these types of industries that are central to in Newport now and where we're going. So it's really fascinating.
And what we love about Newport is that it's an incredibly open community. So if you want to walk down there and you want to see the restoration of that boat, go walk around Iris's campus, walk back there, check it out. We are, as we always have been as a community, very excited to share the things that we're working on and doing. And so any opportunity we get to showcase that, we try and do. I think our community could do an even better job highlighting those things and making sure that people realize how open it is. But when you actually talk to people on the ground in Newport, they're usually very excited or passionate about one project or another and are eager to share what they're working on with people.
Absolutely. All right, so we could have probably started with this, but your background, now that we've gotten everything else out of the way, I know that you've got a really interesting tie to Rhode Island politics and politics in general that has prepared you. Plus, I think your banker experience also is it's a great field to apply to municipal governance that a lot of people forget. It's not, there's a lot of activism, there's a lot of advocacy that takes place, there's a bully pulpit you can use. At the end of the day, you're a manager, and you have to manage people and to a certain extent budget. So your background on and how you ended up here.
Yeah, well, I'll start at the beginning, right? Which is my father came here as a refugee from Laos in the fall of the Vietnam War. And this community was incredibly welcoming to him and my family and has provided us with an incredible amount of opportunities that I've jumped at and worked hard at my entire life. And so because of that, I have always spent at least a part of my time dedicated to civic service. And was lucky enough to start my career off working in politics, managing a campaign for a then state senator who is actually about the age I am right now, who's running for state treasurer. I met him while in the process of advocating on the issue of dropout prevention and some changes I thought would be impactful there, and thought to myself, this is a really thoughtful guy. Now, when you're a young person looking at the field of politics, going to work in the state treasury is not one of those super sexy places that you tend to start. But nonetheless, I felt, this is somewhere where I think I can be impactful and helpful. And so I rolled up my sleeves, went to work with him, and he won. And I became his deputy in the office in 2007. That very quickly became a very interesting job with all the changes and the fallout that ended up happening through the 2008 financial crisis. And was a rapid education at how important it is sometimes to roll up your sleeves and do the work that might not at first seem all that sexy, but that is critically important to how government functions. And so I then worked over the next decade building my career in public finance. And this is the process of advising and working with communities on their finances, specifically around how you tackle large public projects. And so that's what I've spent most of my career doing. I've worked with communities along the entire eastern seaboard on financing everything from how they begin to work themselves out of a municipal bankruptcy type situation to water and wastewater utilities.
Yeah, and now it's sort of a natural pathway here. Your role as mayor, it's not full time, so or is it? I actually don't know that.
It is not.
Yeah.
It's a part-time position. Let's be totally upfront too with what the situation is in Newport.
Yeah.
Being mayor of Newport is essentially being the council president.
Mm-hmm.
And so a large part of my work is actually going to be the interpersonal work of working with my fellow councilors to figure out how I help them realize their full potential at addressing the critical neighborhood issues that we have at hand. In this way, I think some of the civic work I did outside of my day job is just as helpful as my background in finance.
Yeah.
I spent almost a decade chairing Providence Water and quickly learned that what that job really was managing the board that I had before me, but also effectively managing relations with our city council.
Yep.
And a lot of the successes that I was able to achieve there were a direct result of relationships and partnerships I built with those individuals. And I think that challenge is going to be very similar to the one that I have before me right now with the current city council.
It's going to be a fascinating ride. Last couple of minutes here. Converting Newport into a place where, there's already bike lanes, there's already some infrastructure changes that some people I remember were complaining about enormously when it first happened, and now it seems to have been adapted. But, there's just modernizing Newport in terms of, there's aspects of the infrastructure that are like wooden pipes under the ground and things like that. But getting broadband that is more competitive, maybe introducing a new company into what is right now a by default monopoly in terms of internet access, expanding bike lanes, expanding some of the things that we've seen during outdoor dining, where you have some restaurants that have literally set up patios on Broadway. I don't know if that's explicitly tied to the emergency declaration or how that will work on a municipal level, but just new ideas for Newport that some have already been undertaken and some you may have to kind of bring us into a more competitive environment with other similar small cities around the country.
Yeah, how do you go about modernizing the infrastructure of a colonial city?
There you go.
and
Right.
making sure that you both retain the critical aspects of that city's character, while also making it a place that people have the ability to fully embrace and enjoy, right? And you nailed on a bunch of the top issues there, right? Broadband. If we want to attract people who are able to work remotely from Newport, if we want to attract companies that are able to locate in Newport, you need to be able to complete an entire Zoom. I am so happy I got to be able to come in studio with you today, Bill.
Yeah.
And as much as I like sitting face to face, another big part of why I came here in studio is because I wasn't confident that I was going to have an internet connection that was going to let me complete the interview. This came up a bunch during the campaign with other candidates who, you get halfway through their video interview and they'd end up, getting interrupted by a disconnection that happened.
Yeah.
And so I think little things like that highlight just how much work we have to do on the infrastructure front in Newport. As somebody who has built their career working on infrastructure, I'm going to be laser focused on how we make the improvements necessary to make sure that Newport is a livable place for the residents that live here and an attractive place for businesses that want to locate here.
What's your thought on, I don't even really know how to phrase this, but just sort of the mentality that other people in the state of Rhode Island might have about Newport. I know that growing up in southern Rhode Island, I always saw Newport as like, oh, that's like the Disney World or the Times Square of Rhode Island. And then I discovered the underground, quote unquote, community, the artists and the tech people that were starting to move or emerge in Newport. Around 2015 or so is when I really discovered this by coincidence. I was out on tour and I saw, I was in New Haven, and there was a car with Rhode Island license plates and some guys playing Frisbee in the parking lot of this venue. And I was like, hey, what's going on, guys? You guys are from Providence? And this guy, Dave Passafume, who was like a kind of a Newport legend, he was there. He was drumming in this band. He looked at me. He was like, oh, Providence? No, we're from Newport. And I was like, Newport? Really? And we started to go up and play shows with them, and I started to spend more and more time. And finally, we're like, let's move here. I saw it. I was amazed by it. But to this day, there's still, I find, a statewide perception of Newport that it's either an elite place where, you've got, you only go there if, we're a CEO of, a Fortune 100 company or something like that, and you've got a mansion on Ocean Drive, or you like to sail, or you're just a tourist. How can Newport better share its very, very strong undercurrent of community, of art, of technology, of innovation, of fun with the rest of the state?
I think we have to embrace it and showcase it, and that is the fun part. But we need to look at different ways to do that. I thought, for one, that a way to start highlighting the fact that we do have a very vibrant community of young professionals who are civically engaged and who really care about the community was running for office. My ideal scenario is that in the next election cycle, there's a whole new crop of candidates that come up that are dynamic and intelligent and energetic about serving, because I think a city is better served when it has those types of profiles serving as part of government, and at least running for office. Events in the community like the Broadway Street Fair that occur that really draw out and highlight what a terrific and interesting community we have are the exact types of examples of community type events that I think we need to focus on and keep having. The other thing I'd highlight two other things about Newport as a community. The first is that we are a much more diverse community than most other places realize. We are a city in that sense. We have the second highest concentration of affordable housing in the state at 17%. We also have the largest gap in wealth in the state. Yep. And so you have to realize that while there's that image and perception of Newport that I think a lot of people have about the community itself, the reality is that there's a lot more depth to our community than just Ocean Drive, than just the mansions, than just the big momentary events that happen during the course of the year. The second is that the caliber and intelligence of the community in Newport is one of the most incredible that I've ever experienced. We have people that are truly brilliant in every single corner of our community. The number of times I would walk down a street and meet somebody who was the former chief of staff to a major federal agency, or who had really incredible and interesting artistic ties in the community. There's one point during the campaign where I met somebody who was a renowned trombonist at a backyard cookout. I mean, these individuals are parts of Newport's community. They're excited to be there and to live there. They've been drawn in by the magic that is Newport. And a big part of our role is figuring out how we tap them to be involved in government and highlight their participation in our community.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. It's just elevating what's already there and putting it on that scale that is more statewide. And I think it's starting to happen. I hear more and more people talking about experiences that they had in Newport. The World Cup, I guess it starts, or kind of in that moment now. People are like, oh, we got to go to the Fastnet to watch World Cup soccer, whatever it is. And you're starting to see more and more people finding their little zone in Newport. And, it's not a situation where Newport should be gatekeeping its awesomeness. And that includes also, by the way, the outdoors of Newport. Ballard Park is one of my favorite places to go. You know what I mean? Walking Ocean Drive, Hazard Avenue, all of these places. I'll go there on a whim and just say, I'm at the drive itself. I'll listen to something, maybe a podcast or whatever it is, and then I'll get there. And then just that moment is just so important to me, to be on the ground in Newport. I feel everything change inside of myself. Any anxiety, any project I'm working on, it just shifts. It's another dimension. It's like when you go over the bridge, something changes. And it has nothing to do with, oh, now I'm rubbing elbows with people who have mansions on Ocean Drive. I mean, and it's hard to convey that. And I feel like I even get judged for it sometimes in some circles where people are like, you know, they say, oh, he's Newport. He's like, you know, what is he? He's trying to like hang out with like Jay Leno or something like that. And it's like, I'd like to. Hopefully he's doing well, by the way. But there's magic in Newport. There really is.
I am beaming hearing you say that right now. 'Cause that's exactly how I feel, and how I've always felt about our community. I remember as a kid going down to Newport to go fishing and just kind of hanging on the rocks and seeing those big sailboats go by and just feeling really like this is a community that I was welcomed in, right?
Yes.
We always used to joke there. Parts of the East Bay, you drop a line in the water and somebody comes up and says, "You got a license for that?" In Newport, they're coming down saying, "What are you fishing for? You think about going over to this spot?" Instead,
Yes.
it is just like, it is so cool. It is so welcoming, and it's really close. I mean, we are, half an hour, 35 minutes from Providence, and so don't be daunted by having to cross those two bridges there.
Yeah.
I love it. Take the ferry down from Providence. Come visit, enjoy what we have to offer. We have a wonderful network of public parks and public spaces. We are laser focused on trying to make those better and more accessible every single day. And so nothing makes us happier as a community when people come down and experience all that we have to offer.
Xay Khamsyvoravong. Did I say that right?
Nailed it.
Yes. Yes. I've been staring at my notes for like the last 30 minutes for this exact moment. So, all right. And congratulations. I'm extremely excited for what's happening in Newport with you at the helm there, helm of the council, and just congratulations on running such an awesome campaign as well. Your signage was everywhere, and it was not, when I say everywhere, I'm not talking about like, you know, some of these people who go to every public place that they can legally place a sign and you don't see it on a single house. Businesses, homes, you know, you name it. I saw your sign prominently displayed, and I was like, well, you know, that shows organic, vast support.
Thanks so much, Bill. You know, growing up, having a name that wouldn't fit on the back of a soccer jersey in my hometown team, to then see it on a lawn sign was really surreal.
Yeah.
And the one thing about the signs that I'll say, because any campaign operative will tell you that signs don't vote, is that the way we ended up with so much grassroots support was campaigning the old-fashioned way, going door to door. Knocked on over 4,500 doors over the course of the campaign. And when I started, I remember a lot of people saying, what are you doing with your clipboard and your notes there? You know, nobody does that stuff until you're right close to the election. I said, when you have a name like mine, you just get used to having to work a little bit harder to get people to not remember it, because it's really kind of a distinctive name, but to be comfortable with it. Yeah. And so to see, you know, the outpouring of support that we received in the last leg of the campaign, for me was an emotional moment. I'm very sincerely appreciative to everybody who stood out there or took a sign or told their neighbors they should consider voting for the guy with a name that, while they might not be able to pronounce it, they
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.